Hello, this is going to be the video lecture for week 12, which is a week we're starting Cheryl Strayed's Wild, and so that's why I'm wearing my REI hat in honor of starting Wild. As you're reading, you'll see that REI plays a pretty big role at times in this story. Uh, Let me begin with just sort of a few summary of because we're getting kind of close to the end, and you might be wondering, you know, we had supposed to have like 15 and a half weeks in a semester, and we're going to have actually about 17 weeks of assignments. That sounds beyond what's required, but I just wanted to remind people we've just had a few short weeks and we've had lighter assignments on those weeks, and so uh, that's why we'll end up with 17 weeks. Um, the rest of the reading for the semester will be basically be reading Wild, which is a full memoir. So it's about 300 pages. I encourage you to start that early, but we'll be doing about 100 pages a week, at least in my edition. So for this week, you're supposed to read through chapter 6, which in my edition is page 100. It may be different in your edition. Uh, and then we'll be reading Maclean's A River Runs Through It. This is listed as fiction, but most people read it as nonfiction, so we'll have some discussions about that there. Those are the two major reading assignments for the rest of the semester. Two major writing assignments, besides keeping up with the discussion board, will be your blog post will be due on November 10th. And remember that I'd like to have a title for your blog and a little about page that'll explain what your blog is about. And I say page in a web design kind of way, so it's not a page of writing. It may only be a paragraph. And the blog entry can be, maybe 700 to 1200 words, something like that. It doesn't have to be terribly long. Most blog posts are not terribly long. Uh, but I want you to think of the blog post as much more of a conceptual piece. I want you to be thinking about if you were to start a blog, what kind of blog would it be? What would you be writing about? And I hope that eventually some of you will go ahead and start a blog. So that's really the purpose of that assignment. Your final essay, which will be due on December 5th, is a multimodal piece. Many of you have done multimodal already in the course, and in some ways, multimodal authoring is not a new thing. Just look at some medieval manuscripts, for example, and look at the illuminations that are in the margins. So this is not in many ways a new thing. But it's something that I think is such a part of writing with as technology continues to change that we need to have some sort of experience with it. Okay, so that's basically where we're going for the rest of the course. In terms of setting up Cheryl Strayed's Wild, I guess I should do a trigger warning here. She went through some rough times, and so she's fairly honest and explicit about those rough times. So, I hope people are not offended about some of the things she's writing about. I don't think she does it in a voyeuristic kind of way. I think it's treated fairly ethically and sensibly. But I just wanted to warn you that she will basically be writing about, some of the difficult times she's been through. Uh, as we're reading Wild, this is a full-length memoir. So what I'm hoping we'll be able to do is we're kind of hitting the end of the course is start pulling together a lot of the themes and techniques and topics that we've been talking about throughout the course. So as you're reading it, be reading like a writer. Think about the structure. How is this structured? Do you think it's, we haven't used this term yet, braided essay? A braided essay is where you're basically weaving together several different stories. Is it layered? Is she doing something else with narration? The one thing I think you'll find that is clear is she's not doing chronological order. She is doing some things to mix up the chronology of the story that she's telling. So how is she doing that? And let's, kind of pay attention to that. But you should also be looking for things like, do you see the kind of reflection that we saw in the personal essay? Do you see character sketches? Do you see other kinds of techniques going on? I think Strayed has really interesting sentences at times, and we could argue that she's using schema in the classical rhetorical sense of the term, that, schema are different patterns of ways of structuring sentences so that they become almost poetic. The other thing you might want to look for is whether or not you consider it to be a healing narrative. I mean, certainly her hike through the Pacific Crest Trail was a healing journey for her. Now, she describes that, but is the narrative itself a healing narrative? In other words, was the right hike a healing experience, and then the writing of it not necessarily part of that healing experience, or was it part of the healing experience? So we might want to have some discussion about that. Since this is to some extent getting into writing about nature, not just writing about backpacking and writing about coming through difficult times, it's also writing about nature. I just wanted to mention that the current issue of Creative Nonfiction, the magazine that Lee Gutkin edits, is titled Learning from Nature. So this is what the issue looks like. So this is not writing about nature, it's learning from nature. It's dealing with some topics like biomimicry, which is not a term I was familiar with before I started reading this issue. Biomimicry is looking in nature to find answers to things like how to create sustainability. So there's some interesting things in there, but I wanted to briefly talk about one of the articles by Dave Madden. Is an article where he is looking at cognitive psychology. The article is entitled "The Brain is a Masterclass." Dave Madden, and he's basically looking at cognitive psychology to see whether or not it can tell us things about how to make personal essays and creative nonfiction more engaging. The concept sounds fascinating. I don't know that I think it entirely delivers a whole lot, but there was one kind of key point that I took away that I thought was really important. He talks about some studies in cognitive psychology where people remember more and are more engaged in an experience when it's more difficult. And the implication or the tie that he makes to creative nonfiction from that is that if you create a kind of essay where there is more than one thing going on at time, and the reader has to work a little bit to figure out what the major topic is, the reader is going to be more engaged in that piece. The reader will remember more about it, and that it's going to be a more successful piece of writing. So he's talking about things that we've been talking about in the course, things like layering or what I just mentioned in terms of the braided essay. In other words, something other than strict chronological order. So we may, again, we can discuss this some more as we're working through Cheryl Strayed's Wild, because she certainly does this sort of thing. But it's just more evidence to support what a lot of writing teachers have been talking about for a long time, is that do something interesting with the structure in terms of mixing up the chronology. Okay, there is one other thing that I wanted to talk about. While we're going through Wild, I am going to have an additional reading assignment for the graduate students. Because this is a split level class, the graduate students are supposed to be doing something extra in the class to make it a graduate level class. So part of what's going on here is related to that. So this week, I'm asking the graduate students, and this is posted on Blackboard in the folder, to read Jill Kill-Conway's Feminist Plots. It's a chapter from her book on memoir. And to comment on that on the discussion board. So in a way, the grad students are going to be teaching the rest of us what's in that chapter and helping to broaden out some of our knowledge about memoir. So there will be a reading assignment like that for graduate students for this week and the next 2 weeks also. Final thing I was going to mention, and I think I mentioned this last week, Cheryl Strayed and Steve Allman, who's a short story writer, have a blog which is called Dear Sugar. It's kind of a Dear Abby kind of blog, and you might be turned off by that notion. I think I certainly was, and for a long time did not even bother to check this blog out, even though I like Cheryl Strayed and her writing. But in preparation for working with Wild this week, I've been listening to Dear Sugar. It's actually an amazing blog. They read these letters from people who are having relationship troubles or other kinds of problems in their lives. And it's very entertaining, and it's good advice. If you're feeling a little down, just listen to Dear Sugar, and they're going to help straighten you out. Or maybe some of you will want to send a letter to Dear Sugar. Maybe we as a class could even send a letter to Dear Sugar. So think about that. Have a good week. If you have any questions, let me know. Send me an email or post the questions on the discussion boards. Enjoy your reading.